My name is Kate Mohatt. I'm an ecologist for the Chugach National Forest. I'm also president of the Turnagain Arm Mycological Society. And normally I lead forays live for the Girdwood Fungus Fair, but this year everything is going virtual. So I'm here to show you some of Girdwood's mushrooms virtually. And I'd just also like to mention this resource that's really handy for South Central and Southern Alaska especially. This is the Mushrooms of the National Forests of Alaska brochure. It features 51 species. And you can find this free online, and we'll post a link to this. This first mushroom we'll talk about is in the RUSSULA group. And the reason I picked this one is because this trail we're on, and in fact many trails in the Girdwood area, are absolutely lined with it this time of year. This group, as I mentioned, is in the RUSSULA genus. Normal characteristics of this group are a brittle stem. It's called brittle gills in the mushroom brochure. It's going to have white spores. It's gilled. This is an important feature. If you're new to mushrooms, one of the first things you want to determine is whether the mushroom has gills or not. That's going to drastically change your course of how you go about identifying it. So for the gilled mushrooms such as this, spore color is going to be really important. And you can't necessarily tell spore color from gills color. You frequently have to do a spore print, which involves placing a mature cap on a piece of paper, ideally black and white paper. In case the spores are white, they'll show up better. And that can take overnight, up to overnight to get that. But a little bit about this particular species. It's got a really unique smell. This genus has a lot of species, and the taxonomy isn't worked out. But what's cool about this one is you can identify it based on the scent. It's got a really strong smell of maraschino cherries. You might not be able to get that off these old mature specimens. This is another mushroom in the RUSSULA genus that we just talked about, the maraschino cherry one. This one really exemplifies the brittle gills common name. The gills are very fragile on this thing. RUSSULAs can be very colorful. Lots of different colors, greens, yellows, reds. Squirrels love them. Thank you, squirrel. You might see them hanging upside down in trees like Christmas ornaments, and that's squirrels drying them for their cash. They think they're great. Next mushroom, we've got our first bolete. I talked previously about how you want to find out first if the mushroom has gills or something else. That's going to change the direction of how you identify it. This would be our first example of a non-gilled mushroom. This would be in the bolete group. It's fleshy and it's got pores under the cap. And one thing you want to do to help narrow down your identification of species in this group, cut it in half and look for any staining reactions. This species is known as Myco-exepert subglabipres, or people in the Anchorage area, I'm not sure about elsewhere in the state, frequently refer to it as the butter bolete. I'm assuming because it's got a nice golden yellow buttery color and it tastes good, it's a good edible. But if you were to do a Google search of the butter bolete, something in a completely different genus will come up, and that exemplifies the problem with using common names. They're regionally variable. And so what somebody in the East calls a butter bolete is a completely different species than this one. So I know it's a pain to learn Latin, but it can serve you well when you want to be precise about what species you're talking about. All right, we've got our first what's considered choice edible mushroom. And those new to mushrooming will be pleased to know that this one is very easy to identify as long as you learn a few key features. So this mushroom is actually related to chanterelles. It's in a different genus. It's called the hedgehog mushroom. And it's called the hedgehog because on the other side of the cap, it has spiny teeth instead of gills or instead of pores. And it has really nice pale pink cap that stands out really well in the bright green moss. Alright, so whether you're new to mushrooming or you've been doing this for a while, you should probably be able to tell by now that mushrooms are a very diverse group of organisms, the second most diverse group of organisms behind insects in the planet. Lots of diversity. So if you're having a hard time identifying something that you've found, you're not alone. Even experts struggle. And quite a few things, it turns out, haven't even been described by science yet. So that being said, I'd be remiss without talking a bit about the genus CORTINARIUS. This is a hyper-diverse group of mushrooms and very, very common up north. RUSSULAs, as we saw, we have quite a few species of those. CORTINARIUS is the other main genus you need to be aware of because it's so dang common. There can be some really, really beautiful mushrooms in this group. Although they typically get lumped into the LBM or little brown mushroom category, in Girdwood and in most parts of South Central, we have a number of species that are bright purple and really showy. Back to the boletes, or pored fleshy mushrooms with pores under the cap. This is a really young, so brightly colored bolete that's very common in the Girdwood Valley and gets absolutely huge. It's another one of those that doesn't seem to have a bad year. Even last year when we got no rain, this was annoyingly one of the only mushrooms out. It's beautiful to look at. When you cut the cap, especially in the younger specimens, it turns bright blue. And like I said, it's a big, beefy mushroom. The downside is it's not edible. It's very bitter. A very big and charismatic example of the king bolete, or porcini. In England, it's known as the penny bun, which is my dog's name. Very choice edible mushroom, and on some years in South Central, this being one of them, it can be very abundant. So as you can see, the king bolete can get very large. It gets much larger than this even. If you want to eat this mushroom, you want to pick it at its smaller stages because humans aren't the only organism that finds this mushroom absolutely delectable. Slugs, squirrels, worms, in fact this has got some some squirrel bites out of the cap, all enjoy the flesh of this tasty mushroom. So how do you tell it's a king bolete? When you cut the flesh, again it's a bolete, so it has pores under the cap, not gills or anything else. The flesh doesn't stain any colors. You might get a little bit of pink near the surface, but you're not going to get any blues. We'll go next to the admirable bolete. This is in a different genus entirely, but it's very common in the Girdwood area, associates with hemlock. It's got yellow pores under the cap, a very kind of cat tongue-like textured cap. It's wine-colored stem. But this one is extremely common, and it's a good edible. This is one of my most favorite mushrooms on the Chugach. You see, it looks initially, at initial appearance, similar to that admirable bolete, in color anyway. But when you start looking a little closer, the cap is very smooth in texture. When it's dry, it's actually velvety. The stem is a very deep blue. If you just handle it, you don't even have to cut it. It stains blue rapidly. Same with the cap tissue when you cut it. It's a very rapid reaction in a fresh specimen especially. This has a long time been called Boletus luridiformis or Rithopus. It's now in a new genus, Neoboletus. And this, I mean, it's just striking in color. That's what I love about it. The other thing I love about it is that it's a poster child for how little we know about mushrooms, how understudied mushrooms are. This species isn't currently described. It's very common, it's very striking, it can be very large, and the name we have for it, luridiformis, is a European name, and that's not this mushroom. So that's currently in the works of getting its own very own name. So stay tuned for that. Here's another commonly eaten mushroom. It's frequently listed as edible. It's called angel wings. It grows on rotten wood, and it's related to oyster mushrooms. It's got very thin, fragile flesh, pearl-colored cap, very striking, gorgeous mushroom, white spore guild, and pretty easy to identify, especially in a dreary, dark forest. It's a gleaming white. So, Heather Tham behind the camera, thank you very much. We've been out here for 2 hours now. The rain has been pretty steady, which bodes well for the next couple weeks for mushroom season. But we've just barely scratched the surface of what mushrooms are out right now and that will continue to come out over the next few weeks and even the next month. So we attempted to highlight the common genera and of course the choice edible species common in South Central Alaska. Obviously there's a lot to learn and there's lots of ways for you to learn more. I strongly recommend, if you've not downloaded the iNaturalist app, it's a great way to keep track of the mushrooms you're finding, contribute to science, and get identifications of what you're finding from expert mycologists across the globe. Hopefully we do another fungus fair next year in person where we can set up some display tables and you can see labeled mushrooms and handle them in person. That's definitely, I think, the best way to learn your mushrooms, in my opinion. And the other resources that we'll provide throughout the weekend. So I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for joining.